BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. In this episode, I will be looking at a new Zodiac Killer suspect, responding to the Zodiac video on Jimmy Akin's channel, and exploring the world of criminology. But just a couple of quick announcements before we begin. The first is that there is a bonus panel discussion episode on the French Wrecking Crew all about the Zodiac Killer, and I was part of the panel, and it was with Jerome from the French Wrecking Crew, Drew Beeson, and myself, and we were discussing the documentary His Name Was Arthur Lee Allen from 2007, and of course there was lots of Zodiac content on the channel New Cokes 2024, and also a new episode of the Zodcast, all here on YouTube. You can watch all of those for free. But first, I would like to give a shout out to longtime BBOR follower DNA King, who requested a response to the Zodiac Killer suspect Michael Zlaket. Michael Zlaket is a different type of Zodiac Killer suspect, and I'll be going through some of the reasons why right now. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And I had heard of Michael Zlaket before, but to be honest, I wasn't super clear on the details. And I first learned about him because of the Nancy Drew channel, so I decided to rewatch the videos on Michael Zlaket, and there are 3 of them that are available on the Nancy Drew channel. And the case that's been put forward for Michael Zlaket is rather interesting because he was a student in 1966 at San Bernardino High School and then goes on to community college. And a lot of you might be wondering, well, how does that fit into the Zodiac world? Because in 1966, we have the murder of Sherry Jo Bates in Riverside, California, not in San Bernardino, California. And San Bernardino is in Southern California, and the Zodiac's crimes in 1968 and 69 were in Northern California. Well, San Bernardino has a couple connections to the Zodiac mystery, and as I was going through the Nancy Drew videos, I was thinking that the overall argument and thesis that was put forward by them is that maybe Michael Zlaket is a suspect for writing the 1967 Bates Had to Die letters. After the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, we have the Riverside Confession in November of 1966. Then in December of 1966, they find a desktop poem in Riverside, California. And then in the spring of 1967, someone wrote 3 letters saying, Bates had to die, there will be more, signed with a Z. One of them says, she had to die, there will be more, signed with a Z. And in 2016, somebody allegedly made a confession saying that he was responsible for writing those letters when he was a teenager. He was a troubled teen, and he did it as a sick joke or a prank. Now, as I said, I'm trying to interpret the videos of the Nancy Drew channel, and it seemed like he was accusing Michael Zlaket of being that person. And I am simply responding to this content out there, not accusing him myself, but what he was putting forward is that Michael Zlaket was somebody who again is a teenager in 1966, and he used the nickname Zodiac. This was a name that he had given to himself, and it was something that was self-appointed, so people began to almost mock him in a certain way because he was perhaps trying to use the name Zodiac because he thought it was big and powerful and strong. And there's even one story where he walked into a classroom and just wrote the word Zodiac in giant letters on a chalkboard, and he was mocked for it, so people started calling him Big Bad Zod. And the Nancy Drew guy was even able to get a copy of somebody's yearbook, not one that was owned by Michael Zlaket, but by somebody else, and then underneath Michael Zlaket's photo, or perhaps to the right of it, I believe, it said Zodiac. Someone had written the name Zodiac next to Michael Zlaket. Now, this is not the only reason to suspect him. This falls in line with a certain set of patterns and behaviors, and that is that it has been reported that the person who sent this admission in 2016 was from San Bernardino, California, and the authorities looked into the person who claimed that he wrote the Bates Had to Die letters. They investigated him, and they determined that he was not the Zodiac and not the murderer of Sherry Jo Bates, but they did think that he was the person responsible for the Bates Had to Die letters, also known as the loose leaf letters. And the Nancy Drew guy began looking at different relatives of Michael Zlaket? Could they have been someone who went on to be the Zodiac Killer? His father was named Alexander Zlaket, Alex Zlaket, and he just thought all of them were wrong, but I believe he was proposing him as a particular suspect. Now, Big Bad Zode is someone who would even find his way into the writings of Robert Graysmith. Graysmith would talk about these stories of how there is this student in Southern California who was called Big Bad Zode by people because he used the name Zodiac, and they were calling him this to try and mock him. If anything, I think that he's an interesting suspect for the composition of the Bates Had to Die letters, the loose leaf letters, but even by the Nancy Drew Channel's own admission, it doesn't appear that he's going to fit into too many different parts of the Zodiac mystery. But the sole takeaway is about, keeping the pathway open, about going down the open road is, now, this is a very odd coincidence. If this guy wrote the Bates Had to Die letters and signed them with a Z, and he gave himself this nickname Zodiac, and then the Zodiac Killer of 1968 and 69 starts 2 years later, and Sherry Jo Bates goes on to become a possible Zodiac victim, what are the odds that all of this is connected and he's unrelated, or that the name Zodiac is unrelated? So the videos from Nancy Drew were arguing that perhaps somebody actually knew this person. They actually knew Michael Zlaket. They knew that his nickname was Zodiac. They knew that he had written the letters, and they stole the nickname from him. They stole the name Zodiac from him. And there could be a few reasons for this that I'll talk about throughout the duration of the episode. But that seemed like it was the overall thesis of what was being put forward, that somebody knew him personally, they stole his nickname, and if anything got traced back to them, then suspicion would fall onto him, the concept of using a patsy, and so on. But what do you think about this? And as I said, Michael Zlaket was a teenager at the time, and he was a teenager, though, but in his later years, just about to start college. Something that was just purely interesting that was discovered by the Nancy Drew channel was that at one point Michael Zlaket is living in San Bernardino County, California, in a place called 123 B Street. And then he goes on to live on 1234 26th Street, 123 and then 1234. I was like, that wasn't even really mentioned in the video, but you could see the documents that were put on the screen. And I was like, wow, that is a rather odd set of numbers. But I digress from that, and overall, I think that the Nancy Drew channel is very good at sorting through documents, obtaining documents, and I think the guy who runs that has a lot of patience for doing things like going through old yearbooks and even old phone books and records. And if you look at the first 4 years of Black Box Online Radio compared to what the Nancy Drew channel has done, that guy is light years ahead of me. The problem is, though, sometimes he uses fictitious elements and he incorporates them into his videos, and then you might see something in the description box or a pinned comment down below saying, by the way, that was done for dramatic effect, that's not what really happened, or sometimes the videos can be somewhat misleading, and they aren't completely factual, and I don't see any reason to do that. And I don't see any reason to incorporate fictitious elements into the presentations, because some people flat out dismiss that channel as just being pure satire, making fun of something to, I guess, prove a point, although I'm not sure what the point would be. But anyway, there are 3 videos about Michael Zlaket over on the Nancy Drew channel. And on this note of blending facts together, on Wednesday, I do a segment about Jack the Ripper called Ripper Wednesday here on Black Box Online Radio, and I did a recent episode where I was discussing a book review that was written for Robert Graysmith's book The Bell Tower, which is all about Jack the Ripper. And Graysmith is somebody whom I talk about very frequently. He wrote the 1986 book Zodiac, as well as Zodiac Unmasked, and we always have to give credit to Drew Beeson when we use the term graysmithing. He coined the term. Graysmithing is when you take 2 ideas that don't belong together and you put them together, but I perhaps misstated it during that Ripper Wednesday episode about the bell tower. I want to be very clear. This is how I think graysmithing works. Firstly, it does not work like a conspiracy theory. A conspiracy theory is like cream in the coffee. Like if you have a cup of black coffee and then you take just, a little bit of cream or milk or whatever you like to put in there, and you pour it in and then you stir it around, and then it's a lighter shade, right? It's like tan colored now or something like that, or light brown. That's how a conspiracy theory works. You have the substance and then you have something else and you blend it together. A conspiracy theory is blending the facts with the far out wacky ideas. And I used to misquote that all the time. I say it's blending the facts with the falsehoods. No, it's not blending the facts with the falsehoods, blending the facts with the far out wacky ideas. And I read that on Wikipedia once, and I've borrowed it ever since. Because it's a far out wacky idea isn't necessarily false. It's just really, really, really different. And sometimes it's not verified. Sometimes it's things that are just so extreme that only certain people can verify them. Blending the facts with far out wacky ideas. And because it's so blended together, you just get this presentation and it all looks like it's made of one substance. But it's not. There are real facts and far out wacky ideas. And that's not what Graysmith does at all. And I was using some of that terminology on Ripper Wednesday, and I shouldn't have. I think that Robert Graysmith's material is more like a McDonald's cheeseburger. And if the Nancy Drew guy is choosing to do any type of this stuff where he's putting fiction into his video presentations about the Zodiac Killer, he might fall into that category as well. The McDonald's cheeseburger. Okay, so have you ever been to the drive-thru at McDonald's, right? Of course you have. And I'm the kind of guy who eats my fries when I'm driving home, and by the time I get home, all I have is the sandwich. But if you have the McDonald's cheeseburger and it's been sitting outside for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, at first it had many different things, right? The bread, the cheese, the meat, maybe pickles or something like that. It gets all stuck together. At first you had separate entities, you had separate items, and they all get stuck together. That's what graysmithing is, splicing together ideas that don't belong together. A sentence is part true and part false. And I think that that just adds a lot of clarity to how we can approach the 1986 book Zodiac, as well as Zodiac Unmasked and any of these other true crime books that have been written by Robert Graysmith. But I told you guys that I appeared on the French Wrecking Crew with Jerome and Drew Beeson, and we briefly talked about the ABC murders from Agatha Christie, and this could be one possible influence on the Zodiac Killer, because the Zodiac Killer was not only a serial killer, he also wrote letters, he made cryptograms, he made diagrams, he designed the greeting cards. The Zodiac created an enormous amount of written material that was mailed in, and the Zodiac probably didn't know that DNA was going to come along. I think the Zodiac had a high understanding of crime scene awareness and a high understanding of how police would investigate procedures, or at the very least he understood that science existed and there would be developments in science. But at the time, 1968, 70, 71, he wasn't familiar with DNA. So he's writing in all these letters, and he may have left something behind that could be analyzed in the future. But with the ABC murders by Agatha Christie, there is a fictional serial killer called the ABC Killer, and this person starts writing letters to Detective Hercule Poirot, and he's sending the letters to the detective, mind you, and he's signing them ABC, and then somebody is murdered who has the initials that begin with the letter A and the letter A. Their initials are AA. And then the next victim's initials are BB, and they're also murdered in locations that begin with the letter A and the letter B, respectively, and the next one's CC, and so on. And then they zone in on a suspect named Alexander Bonaparte Cust, and he is somebody who fits the bill for the ABC murders. His initials are ABC. He is someone who seems like he could be a person of interest, and also, he is somebody who had epilepsy, so he had very large memory lapses because of his epilepsy, and then they actually find him with the bloody knife. They find the bloody knife in his possession that was used in one of the murders. Okay, well, it looks like it's this guy. He even admits that it was him because he thinks that he stabbed somebody to death while he was going through one of these memory lapses. But it turned out that that was all a ruse, that that was all just made up, that the real killer didn't care about this ABC thing at all. He's trying to present it as this criminal masterpiece that is filled with linguistic signatures, but in reality, there's a completely different motive that the real killer is using. He is just trying to blame it on Alexander Bonaparte Cust because he was the perfect patsy. And this comes to us from an individual named Don Chaney, and we were talking a lot about his appearance in the documentary. His name was Arthur Lee Allen, so I'm not going to go over all of that. I would just direct you to watch the 3-hour live stream that we did with Drew and Jerome on the French Wrecking Crew. But this is just something to keep in mind. Is this the way the Zodiac Killer was operating? Did the Zodiac Killer actually care about anything that he was saying? Did the Zodiac Killer actually believe any of this stuff? Because the Zodiac's writing letters saying that he's going to kill people and he'll die and be reborn in paradise, and those whom he has killed will be his slaves. Did he even have a personal connection to the stuff he's talking about? The Zodiac would go on to write the Death Wheel on the Halloween card, talking about by rope, by knife, by gun, by fire, slaves, paradise. Did that have any meaning to the Zodiac? Or is he trying to blame it on somebody else? And this isn't only going to focus on Don Chaney and Arthur Lee Allen. What about everything that I just told you about Michael Zlaket, Big Bad Zod, if he was Big Bad Zod? You know, we have to be very clear. It's just an accusation, allegedly. But if somebody was using the nickname Zodiac in Southern California and somebody knew that person, all right, well, I'm going to steal their name and I'm going to commit a series of homicides using their nickname, so if anything is traced back, it'll go to them and not me. The whole concept of using a patsy. Now, what do you think about that? I would love to read your responses in the comment section down below. And every Monday is Zodiac Monday here on Black Box Online Radio. And I also do an episode about Jack the Ripper every Wednesday called Ripper Wednesday, and one about D.B. Cooper every Friday, Cooper Friday. And if you want to follow along with all of these true crime discussions, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And you can also go through some of the links in the description box. One of them is for buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnid88, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out here on Zodiac Monday, and I would like to get to that right now. Our first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. And Batman66 has also been helping out a lot with the YouTube shorts that come out here Monday through Friday. I release shorts on YouTube. They come out as reels on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. On Instagram and TikTok, I use the name blackboxnid88, but you can get my personal Facebook, Nid Dahan, and of course Black Box Online Radio here on YouTube. And the next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery. River Prawn Pottery, also, I thank you for your regular and consistent support. And over on buymeacoffee.com, we have one from Mark Winter who says, "Keep doing the panels, Ned. Really enjoy them. The long format and your contribution. Nice to have a calm discussion between experts." Well, I'm hardly a Zodiac Killer expert. I'm just somebody who sorts through this stuff like anybody else. But yes, there will be a new episode of the panel discussion show on the French Wrecking Crew. That's in addition to the bonus episode that came out over the weekend. And you guys can get that probably later today to anyone who's listening to these things live. And if you're listening to this in the future, please visit the French Wrecking Crew for lots of Zodiac Killer discussions. And now we also have one on buymeacoffee.com from DNA King. DNA King, thank you again for recommending the episode on the Zodiac Killer suspect, Michael Zlaket. And he says, "So here you go. Thank you for all your hard work." Well, DNA King, I thank you for your regular and consistent support. And we have one from CZ Guy. CZ Guy has also become a regular supporter here, and CZ Guy, I cannot thank you enough. It really means a lot. Thank you so much. And our final shout out comes to us from Max EF6. Max left this in the form of a super thanks here on YouTube, and you can also use that for contributions, as well as super chats that come out live. And this week there will be a return of the live streams here on Black Box Online Radio. On Tuesday and Thursday I will be coming to you live for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, and I will be doing that regularly from now on. Last week I did an episode on the Freeway Phantom, and also one on the CIA PSYOP manual, because I was able to get my hands on that one. But True Crime Talk Radio in the morning will return tomorrow, as well as on Thursday. And if you would like to download the audio version of this show as a pure podcast, you can find it on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your media, under the names Black Box Podcast or Black Box True Crime. Now recently, I was talking to you guys a lot about Pat Brown, because she did a very extensive episode on the Freeway Phantom. my episode came out last Tuesday, and Pat Brown said something that I thought was really interesting, and that is that people who are not professionals should stay away from forensics and psychological profiling. My immediate response was, "Oh, you're talking to me directly. Must be something like that. And am I going to stay away from forensics and psychological profiling even though I'm not a professional?" Absolutely not. And I do like Pat Brown. I particularly like the episode that she did on Richard Engelbert. He was a realtor from Colorado who was murdered, except for the fact that he didn't exist at all. And she showed how this one true crime channel created this fictitious story. The whole thing may have been generated with AI, even down to the photos that were used of the victim and the murderer. And it turned out that it was a purely fictitious story that was shared by some type of true crime channel that might have even been using an AI generated voice and so on. Okay, because she did some, backtracking research. That stuff is good. That's what I think she's really good at. But as I said, she did this very lengthy discussion on the Freeway Phantom, so here is some amateur profiling on my part. There's a Zodiac killer theory out there that the Zodiac of the 1960s was also the Freeway Phantom in the 1970s. And the Freeway Phantom was a serial killer who operated in the Washington, D.C. area in 1971 and 1972. And there's a channel out there called Hit the Road Jack, Finding the Zodiac. And their Zodiac killer suspect is Jack Torrance. And they accuse Jack Torrance of being both the Zodiac killer and the Freeway Phantom. Alright, I told you, amateur profiling. I absolutely do not believe that these two people were the same person. The Zodiac was somebody who committed the Lake Herman Road murders where he killed David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, the Blue Rock Springs shooting where Darlene Ferrin was murdered, as well as the Lake Berryessa stabbing, which saw the deaths of Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, and the murder of Paul Stein, the taxi driver in Presidio Heights. Now, with the Freeway Phantom, this was a sexual predator who murdered 6 young black females between 1971 and 1972. All of the victims were African American. They were all female, all lone females, who were abducted, transported to a different location, and the only, there are a couple of similarities between the Zodiac and the Freeway Phantom. One of them that I think is very interesting is that with the 5th victim, her name was Brenda Woodard, she was stabbed, and the other victims were strangled. Now, there are some things like SA that take place I don't want to elaborate here on YouTube, but she was stabbed, and she was the 5th victim, and this goes to show that there is this type of escalating violence that serial killers see with the 5th victim. Because who was the Zodiac killer's 5th victim that was supposed to have been number 5? Who did the Zodiac killer think that his 5th victim was? Cecilia Shepard, the victim at Lake Berryessa. Now, why do I say that? Because the Zodiac killer had attacked Darlene Ferrin and Mike Michaud on the 4th of July. Mike Michaud had survived. At that point, he had murdered 3 people, David Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, and Darlene Ferrin. Then the Zodiac stabbed Brian Hartnell at Lake Berryessa. He was the 4th victim. Cecilia Shepard was supposed to have been the 5th victim. We see this very clearly with Jack the Ripper, who committed his most violent crime, the murder of Mary Kelly. She was the 5th victim, and that was the most vicious crime. And with the Freeway Phantom, Brenda Woodard was the most vicious crime, and the killer's also switching from strangulation to strangulation and now using a knife. And it's after the murder of Brenda Woodard that a note was found, actually left on her body. She was dumped on the side of the freeway. That's how this killer gets the name the Freeway Phantom. And a note that was put into a jacket that had been placed on top of her body, and it said that it was the responsibility of the Freeway Phantom, or the Freeway Phantom said he was responsible for the murder. Very bizarre note, and talking about how it is tantamount to his insensitivity to people, especially women and so on. He will admit to the crimes when he is captured, and it's signed the Freeway Phantom. Now, if I didn't know better, I would say that maybe, just maybe, this murder of Brenda Woodard could have been a copycat. She's the only victim that is stabbed. She is the only victim that has a note left on her person. And this is also really interesting. With the other 5 female victims, the Freeway Phantom removed the shoes of the victim, and with Brenda Woodard, her shoes were left on. So I was like, well, now wait a second, is this really the same killer? Overall, I would think yes, because I would think that if they had some type of exonerating evidence, then perhaps they would reveal that. But here's something else that's really interesting. All of the victims, all 6 of them, were either wearing shorts or skirts at the time that they were abducted, and Pat Brown dismissed this notion completely. There was a forensic physician who put forward his own psychological profile that he said he thought that the killer was attracted to these girls because of their lower bodies, as disgusting as it sounds. The youngest victim was 10, the oldest was 18, and she was just like, that's ridiculous. And again, amateur profiling on my part, I'm like, why? Why do you think that that would be ridiculous? Because you have someone who is a sexually motivated serial killer who is abducting female victims, and he's doing what? Choosing them because of their physical appearances. To me, that just sounded clear as day. But she's the professional and I'm not, and I would love to explore her stuff in the future because I do appreciate a lot of what she does. It's just I have some disagreements from time to time. But this whole thing about Jack Torrance being the Freeway Phantom, was he just driving around, little girl wants some candy or something like that? I think that that is utterly absurd. And I'm going to come back to a few details about the Freeway Phantom later on in this particular episode. But I would like to move on to the next segment here on Zodiac Monday, and I would like to give a shout out to Soleil Productions and Publications that has actually written a graphic novel about the Zodiac Killer. And it is called Serial Killer Series Number 1, The Zodiac Killer. One more time, from Soleil Productions and Publications. And this is one where you can see the stories of the victims that have been portrayed through illustration. And I'm going to be talking about this over the course of the next few Zodiac Mondays, because it starts out with the Lake Herman Road murders. And I mentioned this briefly on the live stream on the French Wrecking Crew, that it was proposing a reason for Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday to be in the parking lot at Lake Herman Road, and that is that, number one, they were just there for a conversation, and they were actually there to stargaze and look at the moon, and not specifically to just look at the moon and stars, but talking about it, talking about the moon landing at the time, talking about astronauts, and they aren't necessarily involved with physical intimacy at the time, which is really quite different than the narrative that was established by Jared Kobeck when he was saying stuff like they were down for heavy petting and Betty Lou Jensen's underwear was too tight. I don't think there's any evidence to support that, but I will share this graphic from the Zodiac graphic novel, this page here, and this is one that really caught me off guard because it shows Mike Mageau getting ready for his date with Darlene Ferrin. And I was like, who the hell is that or something? Is this just the bully from some type of rejected 1960s movie or something like that? And it's like, oh, wow, that's Mike Mageau. You look good, as he's talking to himself in the mirror. And there's this toot-toot sound. And I was like, that's not even a speech bubble or a thought bubble. I was like, is that just the sound that Mike Mageau is supposed to make when he's moving around? Toot-toot, toot-toot. But you can see very clearly by the third panel that that's Darlene Ferrin honking the horn and asking him to come out to get into the car so that they can drive around Vallejo and then to Blue Rock Springs Park. I don't think that this is a very accurate way to describe Mike Mageau, because he would have been wearing 5 shirts and 3 pairs of pants on the night that he was shot, and this shows him with a blazer jacket and a button-up shirt that's only going up to his mid-chest, and all of that is exposed. And it's also trying to show Mike Mageau as some guy who's trying really, really hard to be some type of high-end smooth talker, when in reality I think that Mike Mageau would have been just absolutely not going for that particular angle. If anything, he's trying to look a little bit cool in front of Darlene Ferrin, but not to this extent. Then Darlene Ferrin and Mike Mageau drive to Blue Rock Springs Park, and they included this famous line that which I just don't even really think happened, that a suspicious vehicle is chasing them. And Darlene Ferrin says that she knows the driver of the vehicle. She crashes into a log at Blue Rock Springs Park, and then they're like, oh goodness, what's happening? Then the car leaves. Then the car comes back. Darlene Ferrin says once again that she knows who that is. And Mike Mageau says, maybe he's a cop. he must be angry after that ride that you gave him, insinuating that Darlene Ferrin had had sexual relations with that particular police officer in the past, and then all of a sudden Mike Bigeau is shot. Again, I think it's a very, very inaccurate depiction of Mike Bigeau about, just like, oh, well, I guess you had sex with this guy, right? Boom, bullet in the head. And I was like, wow. But, they are just trying to give us a visualization and detailed illustration of what happened on the night of the Zodiac murders. And as I said, I talked about Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs. And I'm going to follow along with the Soleil graphic novel about the Zodiac Killer. But there are some other things that I want to discuss with you guys here on Zodiac Monday. And I said that I would mention the Jimmy Akin video. And there is a new video on his channel. It's just called Jimmy Akin. And the name of the channel, again, Jimmy Akin, A-K-I-N. And this video is going to be part of a new series on the Zodiac Killer that he's going to be doing. Overall, I think that it was very well done. It's very heavy on the basic facts of the case. I'm really curious to see parts 2 and 3 when he's going to do more analyses. And almost everybody in the comments section was saying that they thought he had a very, very unexpected type of voice actor to read off the Zodiac Killer's letters during his presentation. And I'm going to play a clip in just a second of the voice actor reading the letter that took place after the murder of Paul Stein, the taxi driver. It starts out talking about how maybe talking in almost a way that you would expect the Zodiac to speak, and then it switches into something that sounds almost like the Joker from Batman. All right, so I'm going to play the clip speaking. And then I'll respond.
Up to the end of I have killed 7 people. I have grown rather angry with the police for their telling lies about me. So I shall change the collecting of slaves. I shall no longer announce to anyone. When I commit my murders, they shall look like routine robberies, killings of anger, and a few fake accidents, etc. The police shall never catch me, because I have been too clever for them. 1. I look like the description passed out only when I do my thing. The rest of the time, I look entirely different. I shall not tell you what my disguise consists of when I kill. I shall not tell you what my disguise consists of when I kill. 2. As of yet, I have left no fingerprints behind me, contrary to what the police say. In my killings, I wear transparent fingertip guards. All it is 2 coats of airplane cement coated on my fingertips. Quite unnoticeable, plus very effective. 3. My killing tools have been bought through the mail order outfits before the ban went into effect. Except one, and it was bought out of the state. So as you can see, the police don't have much to work on. If you wonder why I was wiping the cab down, I was leaving fake clues for the police to run all over town with. As one might say, I gave the cops some busy work to do to keep them happy. I enjoy needling the blue pigs. Hey, blue pig, I was in the park. You were using fire trucks to mask the sound of your cruising prowl cars. The dogs never came within 2 blocks of me, plus they were to the west. Plus there was only 2 groups of parking about 10 men apart. Then the motorcycles went by about 150 feet away, going from south to northwest. P.S. 2 cops pulled a goof about 3 minutes after I left the cab. I was walking down the hill to the park when this cop car pulled up. Plus one of them called me over. Plus asked if I saw anyone acting suspicious or strange in the last 5 to 10 min. Plus I said, yes, there was this man who was running by waving a gun. And the cops peeled rubber, plus went around the corner as I directed them. Plus I disappeared into the park a block and a half away, never to be seen again. Hey, pig, doesn't it rile you up to have your nose rubbed in your boo-boos? If you cops think I'm gonna take on a bus the way I stated I was, you deserve to have holes in your heads. Take 1 bag of ammunition, nitrate fertilizer, plus 1 gal of stove oil, and dump a few bags of gravel on top. Plus then set the off. Plus we'll positively
And one more time, that was on Jimmy Akin's channel, and that was part of their presentation about the Zodiac Killer. And somebody left a comment down below on his channel stating that they thought that it was a very accurate way to depict the Zodiac because they thought that he captured the manic, narcissistic side of the Zodiac Killer. Now, I absolutely believe that the Zodiac Killer was narcissistic. I don't necessarily know if the Zodiac would have been manic, like a manic depressive, or even somebody who is going through these emotional outbursts or so on. Yes, I think that he would have experienced those types of emotions, but I think the Zodiac Killer would have internalized them. And I'm purely basing this off of the material and evidence that we have. We have the phone call that was made to Nancy Slover after the Blue Rock Springs shooting, where the Zodiac is just described as monotone, speaking in an odd way. The same with Brian Hartnell at Lake Berryessa, who heard the Zodiac's voice for up to 15 minutes. And he's a little bit nervous. He's shaking a little bit at Lake Berryessa. But overall, I mean, most people believe that the Zodiac was low in neuroticism. And I don't necessarily know if the Zodiac would have been the type of person to just break out in those little fits of laughter. But I could be wrong about that because one thing that type of sneaky little laughter indicates is weakness. I once watched a video on the Isla Vista shooter, whose initials begin with E and R, where we don't use his full name a lot here on YouTube. And he was somebody who murdered his 3 roommates, stabbing the final one, George Chun, 93 times. Then he drove to a Starbucks, ordered coffee, and got into his car and recorded a video before he was going to perpetrate a mass shooting. And he's just sitting in the car, just kind of with his gentle laughter. And somebody pointed out that this guy thinks that he's being strong and powerful, but in all reality, he's being very weak. So if the Zodiac Killer experienced any type of emotion like that, I also think that that would be an example of weakness. Somebody who thinks that he's very threatening. But in reality, the Zodiac Killer was somewhat of a coward, and he's also writing these letters because he's expecting that they won't be traced back to him. The concept of somebody who is doing these mean things because people can't fight back. And yes, we've said it once and we will say it again, the Zodiac Killer was an absolute troll. And that's what I think the Zodiac is doing with a lot of these letters. And if you watch the New Cokes videos on Vincent McConnell's channel, New Cokes 2024, he talks a lot about the trolling persona that was created by the Zodiac Killer as well. So I think that this is something that is widely discussed. But I can also ask you guys, do you think that the Zodiac would have been the type of person to laugh like a maniac? Or do you think that that's out of character for the Zodiac Killer? Now, the next thing I would like to talk to you guys about is something that is a little bit different. And I mentioned that I put out shorts Monday through Friday here on Black Box Online Radio, and I did one about the Lisbon Ripper. And I promise you, there is a particular Zodiac connection that I would like to explore here. And the Lisbon Ripper operated in the early 1990s, specifically between the years of 1992 and 1993. And hence the name Ripper. This is somebody who was very similar to Jack the Ripper. He attacked women, he mutilated their bodies, pulled out their organs. And I'm going to go over to the Sin Rights blog that has it right up here. The Lisbon Ripper murders began with Maria Valentina, who was murdered on July 13th of 1992. Then, for almost 6 months, the Ripper does not act. On January 27th of 1993, another body was found in a cabin by construction workers, and she was identified as Maria Fernanda. The final victim was Maria Joao, who was 27 years old, and she was found on March 15th of 1993. Now, you also heard there that all of these victims had the first name Maria. I mean, is there a connection there, or is that just a pure coincidence? I would chalk that up to being a coincidence, and the investigators who followed the case did as well. And with one of the victims, she wasn't mutilated exactly the way Jack the Ripper attacked the victims, but her large intestine was pulled out and part of the intestine was missing very, very bizarre. But Jack the Ripper did steal organs from the victims, such as the kidney and the uterus and the heart. But I digress from that. What I wanted to talk to you guys about was, look at this timeline of events. June to January, January to March, and then the killer stops. The killer stops operating. Look at the timeline and activities of the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer commits the first crime in December, then doesn't act again until July. That's not 6 months, but about 7 months in between the crimes. The infrequency in activity. Then the Zodiac operates again on September 27th of 1969, right? And the Lisbon Ripper operates in March of 1993. So you have this 6-month interval, then you have a 2-month interval. With the Zodiac, you have a 7-month interval and a 2-month interval. And then all of a sudden, the killer stops. Because one of the commonly held beliefs that people have about serial killers is they don't just stop killing. They don't just stop committing murders. Now, wait a second. Maybe they do. I've been talking to you guys about so many examples of serial killers who have short periods of activity, and there's no conceivable explanation as to why they could have stopped. Maybe they start killing and they stop, and not all serial killers operate for 7 years or 8 years or 12 years, the way that it is commonly believed. I've given you examples. We have the Zodiac Killer, the Lisbon Ripper, Jack the Ripper, and how about the Freeway Phantom, who only operated from 1971 to 1972, committing 6 murders, the Moonlight murders that took place in Texas and Arkansas in 1946. That has just, about a 3-month time frame. It's the end of February to the beginning of May 1946. The Axemen of New Orleans operated in 1918 and 1919. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. There could be some explanations as to why the Zodiac and Jack the Ripper and the Lisbon Ripper stopped killing. But with the Zodiac, what seems very, very clear is that he is still out there. We have so many communications from the Zodiac Killer after 1969, but no confirmed murders. And with somebody like the Lisbon Ripper, I just thought that this timeline seemed so similar to that of the Zodiac that somebody commits one murder. Maybe the first murder isn't even extensively planned. Maybe this person didn't even necessarily know that they were going to go through with it 100%. Then, for 6 months or 7 months, they're just sitting back and waiting. Oh my goodness, what did I do? Oh my goodness, what happened? And over those 6 months, then they start to get the urge, maybe I'm going to try that again. And then after 6 months, they're like, okay, I'm definitely going to try it again. I committed the crime. I didn't get away with it. I'm going to commit this murder again. So they do that. And then they're like, wow, I can do this. I can do this. So they become a little bit more thoughtful, a little bit more associated with the planning. And with the Zodiac Killer, he's going to design the Lakeberry as a hood. He's going to wear the symbol, which I think was stolen from the movie Shock Corridor, talking about using a symbol to be invisible to his enemies, that he put on an executioner's costume hood. And with the Lisbon Ripper, he's thinking, all right, I'm going to cut out this woman's large intestine, and so on. The Lisbon Ripper was way more vicious than the Zodiac. But after the 3rd crime, the Lisbon Ripper stops. After the Zodiac Killer's 5th murder, the successful 5th murder, the murder of Paul Stein, the taxi driver, the Zodiac Killer stops. And then it just turns into this giant concept of a short reign of terror. Serial killers do not always have large reigns of terror, large periods of activity, many years of operation. Okay, let's look at the skeptical alternatives. With killers like the Lisbon Ripper, Jack the Ripper, the Phantom Killer, the Axeman, maybe they went to jail for something else. Maybe they went into the military and they were stationed somewhere. Because with the Axeman of New Orleans, it's possible that he was operating in the early 1910s, and then he went into the military, World War I happened, he comes back at 1918, the end of World War I, and there are documented attacks that are very similar. The Cleaver attacks in the early 1910s that are very similar to the Axeman attacks. Okay. With Jack the Ripper, I mean, maybe he was confined to his own household, not even incarcerated, not even committed to a mental institution, but he was just confined to a household by relatives because he was going berserk. With the Lisbon Ripper, it really is very difficult to say, but it does appear that what we know from the facts is that there's a serial killer that starts, has a very odd time interval, and then all of a sudden stops. And as far as committing 3 murders goes, the Atlanta Lovers Lane killer also committed 3 shootings, shooting couples that parked in cars in lovers' lanes, and then all of a sudden, the Lovers Lane killers just stopped killing. The authorities were certain that this killer was going to strike again, and he didn't. So sometimes serial killers don't continue. Maybe they get scared. Maybe they think they're going to get caught. Maybe they think that it's too dangerous. Maybe they've already proven to themselves that they can do this and get away with it, and they no longer have the need and desire to kill. With the Lisbon Ripper, one theory, I mean, this isn't very original, but they think that he contracted an STI from a woman, and he was trying to find the specific woman that gave it to him. And that's why he's looking for people named Maria. I mean, I don't necessarily know if that's true. One of the theories with the Freeway Phantom was that the killer was actually targeting women also because of similar names. I don't know if that's true either. I think there's just, it just could all be a coincidence. But the final thing that I will leave you guys with for Zodiac Monday relates to the documentary His Name with Arthur Lee Allen, which came out in 2007. And while it was the focus of our panel discussion show on the French Wrecking Crew, I do have one follow-up, and that relates to a statement that was made by Arthur Lee Allen's college roommate, a friend of his, and he said that a lot of people approach the criminal investigations almost like a Venn diagram, and what they do is they look at, say, one circle on the Venn diagram represents the Zodiac, and one circle represents their suspect or person of interest. And in the middle, those are the things that they both have in common. Then they draw another circle. Okay, well, my suspect also has this in common with the Zodiac, and then my suspect also has these features, and then they just draw maybe 7 circles in their mental Venn diagram. And in the epicenter, they have one person. And what he said was, that's not evidence. It's not evidence to just look at somebody and see how they might have 7 connections to the Zodiac Killer mystery. I've talked about this a little bit on True Crime Talk Radio by saying that, okay, it is evidence. Ken Maines would say that that's not evidence, those are reasons. It is evidence, it's not strong evidence. But I think the overall takeaway from that is supposed to be that this is something that is going to be not exactly hard evidence, because anybody could do this. Like, you could find any age-appropriate male in California. I mean, if you're going to use Arthur Lee Allen, you could also try with Don Chaney, Michael Zlaket, some of the people that I've mentioned in this episode, Jack Torrance. And you could do that type of mental process. All right, this is what we know about the Zodiac Killer. This is what we know about Jack Torrance. Oh, let's look at the overlap, about like the age and the height and the possible backgrounds and education. And then we can also introduce different variables and different subjects and create more circles on the Venn diagram and just put this person in the epicenter. And I understood what the guy was saying. And that is that the reason why it's an ineffective method is because you are already pre-choosing the suspect and you're making the circles fit. You're pre-choosing the suspect and you're making the evidence fit. And I do have to agree that that is probably going to mislead a lot of people. But that's all for me now. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Zodiac Monday. And I would love to know what you think about the presentation on the Jimmy Akin channel. I would love to know what you think about Michael Zlaket as being a suspect for the 1967 Bates Had to Die letters. And please put anything you want in the comment section down below. If you have any comments about the Freeway Phantom, the Lisbon Ripper, and any of the other stories that I've discussed here on Zodiac Monday, I also want to read those comments as well. One more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe. Visit some links in the description box. Black Box Podcast on Spotify, Black Box True Crime, and anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is Ned Dahan. There's also a page, Black Box Online Radio on Facebook, BlackBoxNed88 on TikTok, BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram, and I will see you over there. Goodbye.